Revenge with Karen.
I need this rewritten by 7 a.m. Just soften the tone, Meredith. You know how these reports come off to leadership. That was the message. 11:42 p.m. The glow of her monitor cast just enough light to catch the new wrinkle in her forehead. Soften the tone after she'd spent 4 hours triple-checking figures that directly contradicted what the COO had presented at the last town hall. Falsified metrics. Backdated signatures, bonuses tied to KPIs that didn't exist outside of PowerPoint slides. And she was the one expected to round the corners off the lie. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard like they were waiting for an exit ramp. Instead, she opened the report, duplicated it, and saved a version titled, "Do not alter original compliance draft." It joined a growing folder of similar files she'd quietly been compiling since April, after she was encouraged to skip lunch for a week to prepare a board briefing no one read. That folder now had 183 files, and a spreadsheet of Slack timestamps, and a few voice memos she probably shouldn't have, but definitely did, record during closed-door coaching sessions. It wasn't one single explosion that ended her patience. It was a decade of slow-drip corrosion. 10 years of being praised publicly as indispensable, privately being told her tone wasn't collaborative anytime she flagged a legal risk. 10 years of watching less experienced men hopscotch past her up the ladder with titles like VP of Strategy and Innovation Architect, while she remained, somehow, just Meredith from compliance. She wasn't naive. She didn't need confetti or champagne. But she did expect, at minimum, not to be treated like an unpaid intern with a clipboard fetish. If you're listening and feeling that twinge in your gut, like you've lived this in some form, go ahead and tap that subscribe button. Most folks tune in without it, but it really helps the team keep stories like this coming. And throw a like if you've ever had to fake smile your way through a meeting you weren't paid enough to attend. Back to Meredith. She used to fantasize about quitting with a middle finger made of glitter and fire. But lately, found herself daydreaming about something quieter, cleaner, legal. There was something deeply satisfying about the idea of an exit so surgically precise that no one could see the blade until it was buried to the hilt. The late-night Slack message became her line in the sand. She replied simply, "Received," then logged out, for good. No emoji, no exclamation point, no thanks. She let the silence hang like wet drywall. When she stood from her desk, her spine cracked audibly, years of tension uncoiling like rusted springs. At home, she poured a glass of wine, opened her personal laptop, and began indexing her files. She labeled folders by violation type, created backup copies on encrypted drives, password protected each one like it was an heirloom. She didn't know yet what shape her revenge would take, only that it was coming. And this time, it wouldn't look like rage. It would look like compliance. By sunrise, he'd already documented 5 separate instances of misclassified exempt labor, 3 falsified audit trails, and a dozen HR emails subtly discouraging written complaints. She cross-referenced dates with her old calendar invites. There it was, April 12th, 3:00 p.m., meeting with Greg and Lisa. The one where Greg said, "Let's not waste time documenting this, okay? We're all just trying to move fast." That sentence was now immortalized in her personal audio archive. She wasn't impulsive. She didn't need a scene. Meredith had always believed in the power of the record, in the weight of a clean file, and for 10 years she'd been the one cleaning up everyone else's messes like a janitor for corporate morality. Now she was done sweeping. When her phone buzzed again at 6:15 a.m., she didn't check it. She was already writing a new kind of report, not one meant for internal review or watered-down approval. This one had a very different audience. And by the time HR came calling, Meredith would have the exact date, time, and version number for every lie they ever asked her to dress up like truth. "Hey Meredith, can you pop into the Glassfish room for a quick chat?" They always picked the worst names for these rooms. Glassfish, bamboo, synergy. Like slapping a yoga mat on a crime scene made it feel less like an execution. Meredith walked in holding a coffee she hadn't had time to drink, hair tied back in that messy knot she'd perfected over a decade of 7 a.m. calls and 11 p.m. edits. On the other side of the glass sat Celia from HR, smiling like she'd just won a raffle. And next to her, Darren, the VP of Nothing Useful, whose only skill was echoing buzzwords in meetings and pretending they were ideas. "Thanks for coming on such short notice," Celia chirped, already sliding a printed paper across the faux oak table. "We wanted to let you know that, due to restructuring, your role is being sunsetted." But she raised a finger like she was about to cast a spell. "We would really appreciate your support in communicating this transition positively." Meredith blinked once, then twice. No rage, no gasp, just that familiar, cold tightening in the chest. The one she got every time someone thanked her for going above and beyond, right before asking her to clean up someone else's ethical landfill. Celia continued, "We've drafted a suggested LinkedIn post for you. Just a few lines, expressing gratitude for the incredible opportunities you've had here. It really sets the tone." Meredith picked up the paper. It was already warm from the printer. "After 10 wonderful years, I'm excited for what lies ahead. I'm so grateful for the amazing people, lessons, and leadership I've encountered. This isn't goodbye, it's see you later." It read like a Hallmark card co-signed by Stockholm Syndrome. Not a word about the real work she'd done. No mention of the audits she salvaged, the lawsuits she prevented, the labor violations she quietly rewrote into compliance miracles. Just another woman smiling through the erasure of her own spine. She folded the page once, then again, as neatly as an origami knife. "Of course," she said. Darren exhaled in relief as if she might have flipped the table. Celia beamed. "Thank you, Meredith, that's so classy of you. Not everyone gets how important the optics are." "I do," Meredith said, standing. They offered her a box. She declined. She already had everything backed up. She walked past the receptionist, gave her a sympathetic glance. Past the company logo in the lobby, some abstract swirl that cost more than her annual bonus. Past the award shelf, where one plaque still bore her name from 5 years ago, Integrity in Action. Outside, the sunlight was brutal in that way only early afternoon could be, when the rest of the world keeps spinning like your life wasn't just set on fire. She didn't go home. She didn't cry. She went straight to a coffee shop with no Wi-Fi and a broken bathroom door. Neutral ground. She opened her laptop. The post was already typed. She copied their script word for word. "After 10 wonderful years, I'm excited for what lies ahead." Then on the next line she added, "Tagged for visibility at U.S. Department of Labor." She clicked post. It wasn't spite. It was precision. Like the final pin dropped into a hand grenade they handed her with a smile. 30 seconds later, her phone buzzed. A coworker, "Meredith, what the hell did you just post?" 60 seconds. Another, "Girl, that was savage. 2 minutes." A like from a labor attorney in D.C. She sat back, letting the silence fill her like oxygen. No regret, no apology. Just a strange, still warmth like heat from a fuse that had finally caught. Back at HQ, Celia was already emailing IT. Please revoke her credentials immediately. Someone from legal was whispering to Darren. Did she really tag the feds? But it was too late. Meredith didn't need access anymore. She had the originals, the screenshots, the audio, the receipts. And now the story was no longer confined to a Slack channel or buried in a file marked private HR comms. It was public, and the clock had started ticking. Not for Meredith, for them. The moment her thumb tapped post, Meredith felt nothing. No surge of adrenaline, no cinematic music swelling behind her. Just stillness, like slipping into a lake at midnight, quiet, cold, and deliberate. The LinkedIn post, in all its beige glory, went live at 3:18 p.m. Eastern. Word for word, exactly what HR had scripted. No edits, no extra flair, no emojis or exclamation marks. Just the line they'd handed her like a final insult on company letterhead. Then, an extra sentence they definitely didn't write. Tagged for visibility at U.S. Department of Labor. 14 words, one tap. That was the depth charge. She closed her laptop like she was sealing a tomb and slid it back into her bag. Then she picked up her phone and uninstalled Slack. Not logged out, deleted. Gone were the pings at 11:07 p.m. asking her to polish the language on a termination notice. Gone were the little red circles of hell next to threads labeled compliance, urgent. Gone were the DMs from senior staff trying to flirt their way past violations. She'd kept screenshots of those too, and voice memos, and calendar receipts. She hadn't survived 10 years in corporate compliance without understanding the golden rule: keep a record of the record. Outside the coffee shop, traffic blared and engines hissed in that low, urban whine that made everything feel slightly unhinged. She crossed the street slowly, letting cars wait. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small or rushed or lucky to be here. She felt clean, like a weapon that had been hidden too long in a drawer, finally unsheathed. Inside her apartment, she made tea. not because she needed it, but because it kept her hands busy. When she sat back down at her desk, the notifications had already begun. Cash 1, someone from HR. Probably Celia, still trying to boost engagement. Like Hash 2, a quiet ally in procurement. He'd once whispered thanks after she'd blocked a vendor scheme that would have tanked his department. He never forgot it. Comment Hash 1, a random recruiter. So brave of you to share this. Best of luck on your next chapter. Comment Hash 2, a lawyer, not random. She remembered his name from a workplace law blog she'd followed for years. His comment was short, following. Message Hash 1, Meredith, are you okay? Message Hash 2, holy crap. Did you just tag the Department of Labor? Yes, she did. And now every executive who had dismissed her as too rigid or not aligned with our growth mindset was doing the exact thing she'd begged them to for years, reading the fine print. By nightfall, her post had over 400 views. Nothing viral, just steady. Unnerving, like a slow drumbeat. He didn't reply to comments, didn't like any messages, didn't even check the analytics. She wasn't playing their game anymore. Instead, she plugged in an encrypted drive. Folder name, HR chain of custody. Subfolders, time theft by MGMT, misclassification records, suppressed complaints, coaching session audio, Celia memos redline, each one backed up. Time-stamped. Cross-referenced with calendar invites, emails, and Slack exports. And at the bottom, folder labeled pre-lit DOL package. It was already zipped, already ready. She wasn't going to send it just yet. No, that would come later. She just needed a signal. Some proof that what she'd unleashed wasn't just noise in a sea of performative gratitude posts and fake job wins. That signal came at 11:22 p.m. A reply, public, from an account verified as part of the Department of Labor's Regional Compliance Office. DMs open. Thanks for raising awareness, we're listening. Meredith stared at the screen for a full 60 seconds. Then she clicked into her drive, attached the zip file, and began typing a message. Her tone was not angry, not even vengeful. It was what it had always been, compliant, thorough, unshakably documented. The cursor blinked beneath her draft message like it had a heartbeat. Meredith paused before typing the first line, not out of hesitation, but from a kind of reverence. This wasn't just a DM. This was the first time in 10 years she would speak to someone whose job wasn't to protect the company, but the truth. Thank you for responding, she wrote. Attached is a file documenting 6 years of labor classification discrepancies, retaliation incidents, and systemic overtime violations. All entries are time-stamped, source-backed, and organized by policy breach. She hit send. The file, pre-lit DOL package zip, locked in at 214 MB. Inside, 348 pages of evidence, cross-indexed, and internally linked like a quiet war journal. Nothing redacted, nothing exaggerated, just clean, chronological rot. She'd included annotated screenshots of timecard systems with locked entries, overtime automatically capped at 40 regardless of punch times. Slack threads where managers joked about keeping reports salaried to avoid timesheet whining. Even internal slide decks outlining the benefits of strategic role flattening for non-critical personnel. Translation: screw the admins and analysts, they don't lawyer up. She also attached a bonus folder, Celia's greatest hits. Inside were PDFs of HR's now infamous gag emails, subject line, confidential reminder, bypass formal complaint channels when possible. Another gem read, don't put concerns in writing, just call me. It even screen recorded the company's internal whistleblower page. It had been temporarily unavailable for 11 weeks last fall. IT claimed a back-end migration. Meredith knew better. The message sent without fanfare, just a small green check mark. Her fingers lingered over the keys, not trembling, just still. She leaned back in her chair, eyes burning from a day of staring down ghosts, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Kind of breath that only comes after you put the knife down, or after you throw it. Outside, sirens wailed distantly, background noise in a city where most people worked too much and got paid too little. The world hadn't changed, but hers had, because the file was out of her hands now. It couldn't be buried in a SharePoint folder renamed Q for Resources or Learning and Development. It couldn't be rewritten by Darren or softened by Celia. It was now in federal custody. The next morning, she woke to a notification. Not from LinkedIn, from her email. Subject, U.S. Department of Labor submission acknowledged. We have received your documents and begun preliminary review. You may be contacted for additional context. Please retain all original materials. Below it, a reference number. Real, official, traceable. She smiled for the first time in weeks. Not wide, just enough to feel it crack the corners of her fatigue. Meredith got dressed, poured coffee, and didn't open LinkedIn. She didn't need to, her part was done for now. The match had been struck. The fuse was lit. She grabbed her keys and left her apartment, not because she had somewhere to be, but because for the first time in a long time, she could walk outside without bracing for impact. She didn't have to double-check her tone or shrink herself into not-a-threat posture, or rehearse ways to deflect when someone forgot her name in meetings they'd scheduled. She was no longer Meredith from compliance. She was Meredith, federal informant, documentarian of decay. A diner she liked, she ordered eggs and rye toast, phone face down. Her hands didn't shake when she held the fork. No buzz of anxiety in her throat. Just silence, pure and earned. Meanwhile, back at HQ, Celia was refreshing LinkedIn like a gambler waiting for a spin to land on black. Darren had scheduled an emergency sync with legal, just in case, and the CFO was already on a call with outside counsel, voice low and tight. They hadn't gotten a letter yet, but Meredith had, and she wasn't scared anymore. It took less than 36 hours for the company's internal gears to start screeching like a busted ceiling fan in a summer rental. HR was the first to twitch. Meredith's post had quietly metastasized across LinkedIn, not in some viral explosion, but like mold behind drywall. Steady, invasive. A few ex-employees liked it, then a labor consultant. Then someone from the Department of Labor shared it. Celia called a status sync at 8:15 a.m. sharp. Legal dialed in. Darren joined late, breathing hard, probably fresh off another urgent Peloton ride. So, Celia said, smoothing her blouse like it was Meredith's dignity, how do we contain this narrative? Contain, the associate counsel said, tone already threadbare. She tagged a federal agency. This isn't a bad Glassdoor review. In the background, IT had already moved. Meredith's company email was locked before her second cup of coffee. No warning, just a security protocol activation labeled departure high risk, passwords invalidated, access revoked. What they didn't know or conveniently forgot was that Meredith hadn't accessed her work email since the day she left. She didn't need to. The receipts weren't on their server, they were on hers. At 11:03 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number, voicemail. Hi Meredith, this is Tanya from Legal. We're hoping to find a way to resolve this amicably. Just a quick chat if you're available. No pressure, we really respect everything you've done for the company. Me back at your convenience. She didn't, because there was nothing left to resolve. She hadn't sued. She hadn't demanded a payout. She'd simply complied with federal law. She'd reported violations that, by all rights, should have been self-disclosed by the company years ago. That wasn't vengeance. That was due diligence. Back at HQ, leadership huddled behind closed doors, pretending the whole thing was just a disgruntled exit. Darren's pet phrase. Don't feed the drama, he said. She's emotional. Let it die in the cycle. Which might have worked if Meredith hadn't submitted 348 pages of documented policy violations to the Department of Labor, complete with timestamps, revision histories, and anonymized witness statements. Instead of dying, the story simmered. An analyst in finance forwarded the LinkedIn link to 3 colleagues. Didn't she audit our 2020 contractor files? Because if she's right, an admin in payroll added the post to a burner subreddit she ran called r/corporate sinkholes. It hit 3,000 upvotes in 2 hours. A former recruiter DM'd her privately. You said what I couldn't, thank you. Meredith read none of it. She was in a library, sipping weak coffee and finishing a summary report for the DOL. She was drafting it the way she'd always drafted internal audits, precise, sterile, immaculately referenced. No adjectives, just facts and impact. A quote from a VP here. A PDF of a timestamped coaching memo there. She cited her sources like a scalpel. Every minute they spent scrambling for a PR response, she was laying bricks in a case they couldn't whiteboard their way out of. Darren suggested the comms team draft a "We support all former employees" statement. Legal advised against it. Don't engage. You acknowledge you're liable. So instead, they ghosted the fire, acted like the building wasn't burning. No mass email, no statement, just dead air and bad coffee. Meanwhile, Meredith received a second email from the Department of Labor. This one had bullet points. They'd reviewed her materials. They were proceeding to formal inquiry. She would be kept in the loop. No exclamation marks, just wait. Her eyes scanned the words and a calm spread through her like anesthetic. Not numbness, not detachment, something sharper. Cleaner. Control. It had taken so much from her, credit, time, identity. but they had never taken her documentation, never touched the truth. And now, that truth had an agency seal on it and a case number. They could disable her email. They could whisper in boardrooms and slap together non-denial statements and treat her like a glitch in their clean, branded matrix. But Meredith wasn't a glitch. She was the audit, and she had already been filed. The envelope was white, heavy, unassuming, except for the seal in the top left corner. U.S. Department of Labor. No mistaking it. No way to pretend it was junk mail or a friendly government check-in. It was thick, too, had weight to it, like the ink inside knew what it was about to trigger. Meredith didn't open it right away. She let it sit on the kitchen counter while she made coffee, folded laundry, and ran the vacuum like it was any other Tuesday. But her eyes kept drifting back to that envelope, to the precise black print on the front, her name spelled out in a font that carried consequence. When she finally sliced it open with the same letter opener she once used to unbox 10 years of corporate holiday cards, signed the team, she didn't even sit down. She read it standing. Subject: Initial Inquiry Employment Practices, Case No. 2383 to 91Q. Letter was written in formal calm, the way only government prose could be. No drama, no commentary, just structure. They were initiating a formal inquiry into her former employer's labor practices, including, but not limited to, compliance with the Fair Labor Standards Act, retaliation protections, and whistleblower safeguarding. She was not being investigated. She was being acknowledged. They had validated the documents. They found sufficient grounds. The case was open. Meredith didn't smile. She didn't cheer or text a friend or pour a glass of wine like she'd fantasized during sleepless nights. She just exhaled. The kind of exhale you give after holding your breath underwater a little longer than you should have, just to prove you could. She went back to her laptop, logged into her personal email, created a new folder, Case 2383, supporting docs. Then opened a second tab and began pulling up every HR memo, compliance update, and internal-only document she had archived. The ones they thought were gone. The ones Celia had marked with that passive-aggressive watermark, draft do not circulate. The ones Darren sent per our convo, let's not forward. The ones that had lived in Slack threads before being mysteriously deleted after routine hygiene sweeps. But Meredith had saved them. All of them. He didn't forward them to the Department of Labor in a giant dump. That would have been messy. No, she curated, organized, created a narrative through chronology. She titled the first email string April 2021 classification reversal request. The next one, July 2022 let's keep this off the record thread. Each document got a note, a timestamp, a named sender, a relevance tag. And as she compiled, she blind CC'd one recipient on each. Doll investigations at Dolgov every time she hit send. It was clean, surgical, like tightening a screw. There was no rage in her. No fantasies of watching Darren cry in a deposition or Celia sweat through a town hall. Those thoughts had come and gone like dreams in a fever. What remained now was purpose, because chaos would burn itself out. But clarity had permanence. At HQ, first whisper started with a scheduler. She was asked to block off time on the calendar for a private external meeting involving legal, HR, and one of the C-suite names. She'd seen the letterhead from the DOL when it arrived, couldn't unsee it. A week later, she was gone. Voluntary resignation, officially, but everyone knew she'd asked too many questions after reading Meredith's post. Then came the audit prep emails, the hush-hush data integrity meetings, sudden demand to re-review classification logic from the past 4 fiscal years. Nobody said it out loud, but every pulse in the building knew something was coming, and it wasn't a press release. One executive, someone who had never once said Meredith's name in a meeting she attended for 4 years, forwarded a frantic internal summary to legal, who approved that LinkedIn post. Meredith kept working. She didn't check her post again. She didn't need to. Its job was done. Instead, she drafted a witness list. Not names, she wasn't malicious. Just roles, patterns. She flagged 3 former employees whose complaints had mysteriously disappeared from records, but existed in CC'd emails she'd archived. She cross-referenced exit interviews with calendar invites for unscheduled performance reviews that magically appeared afterward. She wasn't building a case. She was finishing one. And this time was no Darren with his crocodile praise. No Celia with her laced compliments. No half-smile at a girl's followed by erasure. Just truth, time-stamped and federally indexed. When she closed her laptop for the night, the last file she uploaded was titled Final memo misconduct summary, verified sent at 11:52 p.m. Same time, Darren used to ping her about last-minute adjustments. Except this time, she was the one writing the final word. Invite hit her inbox like a mosquito in a quiet room, small, whiny, and full of presumptions. Subject line, all hands transparency session Friday at 10 a.m. Beneath it, a message from Celia that read like it had been processed through 6 layers of legal sanitization. Hi Meredith, we're organizing a company-wide transparency discussion to reaffirm our commitment to ethical practices and employee trust. We'd love it if you could join for a few brief comments, just to clarify the nature of your recent LinkedIn post and help us contextualize for the broader team. Help them contextualize. She read it twice, once as Meredith, the compliance manager, once as Meredith, the witness. The sheer audacity might have been amusing if it weren't so perfectly on brand. A company that never invited her to speak when she flagged misclassifications in Q2 2021 now suddenly wanted her to share a few thoughts on the public investigation they triggered by treating her like a liability with a pulse. She didn't respond immediately. She didn't slam the laptop shut. She just sat back, breathed deep, and reread the phrase, brief comments. That meant they were trying to control the window, manage the optics, use her voice to sew their narrative shut. So she opened a new tab, logged into the secure DOL portal, uploaded a screenshot of the invite, complete with metadata. Then she attached the message history. Then she wrote one line, "Company has requested I appear on a public all-hands meeting to address their investigation. I am willing to do so. I have blind CC'd this office on my reply." Then she clicked back to her email. Opened Celia's message. "Happy to attend. I will provide a high-level compliance summary as requested. Please be advised that representatives from the Department of Labor may also be on the call, as this discussion may reference active federal inquiries." Then she blind CC'd the department again. Sent. She closed her laptop and exhaled. No dread, no hesitation, just protocol. That Friday at 9:59 a.m., the company's little Zoom grid flickered to life. Black boxes, white names, bad lighting, tense faces. Meredith's tile was neutral, no virtual background, just a tidy bookcase and a soft lamp glow. Professional, controlled, not performative. Celia's face appeared first, smile pre-installed. Darren popped up a second later, pale and shiny, sitting in front of what looked like a last-minute attempt at friendly Dacre, a succulent and a framed quote that read "Progress Perfection." Meredith nearly snorted. "Thanks for joining, everyone," Celia began, her voice wobbling just enough to betray the rehearsed calm. "Today's session is really about openness, about transparency, about reaffirming our shared values in this challenging time of change." A few polite nods, the kind that meant, just say what you have to and let us go. Meredith has generously agreed to say a few words. "Meredith, the floor is yours." She nodded once. Calm, surgical. "Thanks, Celia. As you mentioned, I was asked to provide a brief compliance summary, and I'm happy to do that. I'll begin with an overview of labor classification standards per FLSA and how our internal documentation reflected or deviated from those benchmarks across the last 4 fiscal years. Then, I'll review several policy inconsistencies, particularly around exempt designations and overtime practices, which I previously raised to HR. Her voice didn't quiver. It didn't rise. Cut, precise, unshaken. I'll reference key memos by date and revision history, documenting shifts in language following protected disclosures. I'll also note discrepancies between onboarding documents and actual role functions, per Section 213 exemptions. All documentation discussed is available via the Department of Labor. The silence that followed was cavernous. No one interrupted. No one dared. Then, from the gallery of faces, one flickered. A box labeled DOL Official Audit Team 2. Anonymous. No video, just there, present. Meredith let her eyes land on it for half a second, then continued. "To be clear, I am not here to accuse. I am here to clarify. Compliance isn't about punishment, it's about prevention. My materials reflect internal conversations, procedures, and outcomes that are now part of a formal inquiry." Darren cleared his throat, but no sound followed. Celia blinked too many times. No one asked a follow-up question, because no one knew who else was in the call, and no one wanted to be the first to lie on record. At exactly 10 o'clock a.m., Meredith clicked the Zoom link. The meeting room opened into a gallery of blank stares, corporate blazers, and nervous throat clears. There were 87 participants, most with their cameras off. A few managers had their forced smile expressions locked in place. They were attending a funeral for someone they'd only met in quarterly reviews. Darren was already there, straightening his tie on camera like a man convinced a bit of polish might offset a rotting foundation. Celia's face was tight but alert, like someone mentally refreshing her crisis comms playbook mid-scroll. Meredith didn't smile. She didn't wave. She didn't use one of those idiotic Zoom greetings like "Hi, everyone," or "Thanks for having me." She just sat there in a simple gray blouse, bookshelves behind her, her gaze steady as granite. Celia kicked things off. "Thank you all for making time today. As you know, this is a voluntary call, just a chance for us to address questions and clarify some of the concerns that have recently surfaced online. We're all here in the spirit of transparency, and we're very grateful that Meredith has agreed to share a bit of her experience." Meredith, she added, like cueing a substitute teacher to explain why half the students were suspended. Meredith leaned forward slightly. No script, no bullet points on a second monitor, just memory and documentation sealed in bone. She began, as requested, "Here's my compliance summary." That's all she said before it started, an avalanche in a calm voice. On March 14th, 2021, I submitted a compliance memo regarding the misclassification of non-exempt roles in the product development team. The memo was acknowledged by HR and flagged for escalation. No follow-up occurred. On April 22nd, I received an email from Darren requesting that I reframe the tone for a more executive-friendly readout. Attached was a redlined version, omitting all references to FLSA thresholds. Slide. Click. File reference visible on screen. She continued. On June 2nd, 2021, HR hosted a training refresh during which team leads were advised not to document overtime violations in email. One slide read, "If it's not written, it didn't happen." I preserved that slide. Slide. Click. Evidence queued. Silent. On October 12th, 2022, I flagged 3 instances where time cards had been auto-adjusted to 40 hours despite actual logs showing 51.2, 47.6, and 56.9 hours worked, respectively. I was told this was an admin quirk and that I should not distract payroll with edge cases. Each point had a date. Each date had a source. Each source had a name. She was listing rot, naming mold, in front of the very walls that had sealed it in for years. Midway through her third segment, a series of internal Slack messages about hushing concerns during investor season. General counsel's camera blinked, then froze, then disappeared. His name remained, but his feed was gone. A second later, the tiny green dot next to his name vanished too. Offline. Meredith didn't acknowledge it. She kept going. On December 9th, 2022, I raised a concern about employee retaliation involving performance improvement plans issued within 2 weeks of protected complaints. 3 of the 4 employees were terminated within the quarter. No exit interviews were conducted. All 3 had signed NDAs upon departure. 2 had requested legal mediation before signing. Her tone never spiked, never cracked. She wasn't angry. She was exact. Participants began to shrink further into their boxes. Someone muted themselves after their cat meowed, then didn't unmute again. Another participant in sales accidentally typed "Jesus Christ" into the chat, then quickly deleted it, not before 20 people saw. Meredith clicked through a final document, an email chain from Celia marked confidential, in which the phrase "this isn't a legal risk if she's gone quietly" was used twice. She paused. Let it land. Let it breathe. "Let me close with this," she said, folding her hands calmly. "Compliance isn't a threat. It's an opportunity. It's what prevents us from becoming headlines." I flagged concerns internally. I followed protocol. Those protocols failed. I followed the law. A deep silence hung in the digital air. Heavy, stifling, real. She didn't fill it. She just watched. Because she knew what was coming next. It happened around the 42-minute mark. Meredith had just finished walking through the timeline of retaliatory patterns, PIP initiation dates aligned with internal complaint logs, tracked with eerie consistency over 4 fiscal quarters. She quoted from Slack transcripts, named HR reps, referred to exact clause numbers in the Employee Code of Conduct, and cited the company's own arbitration waivers. That's when someone, an analyst maybe, or one of the quieter folks in ops, unmuted themselves by accident and whispered the question. Is she reading from a deposition? It wasn't meant for broadcast. but it landed like a dropped glass in a silent church. The air went dead. Celia blinked so fast it looked like a seizure. Aaron's jaw tensed into a shape you could build scaffolding around. Someone in finance turned off their camera. Another tile went blank. Then another, and Meredith, she didn't flinch. She calmly closed her binder, slow enough for the click to be audible through her mic. It wasn't dramatic, it was just final. "Thank you for your time," she said, with the kind of chill professionalism that would haunt HR dreams for the rest of their careers. But she wasn't done. Looked directly into the camera, eyes flat and unbothered, and added, "And per Clause 14 of the Severance and Non-Disclosure Agreement, which was negotiated under federal oversight, I am explicitly exempt from any post-employment retaliation, silencing measures, or punitive action related to whistleblowing, or the disclosure of non-trade-related information related to labor violations. That clause has been recorded." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because at that exact moment, in the corner of the Zoom window beneath her name, now labeled simply Meredith, a small emblem quietly appeared. An official seal. U.S. Department of Labor. Tile ID Doll Investigations 03. No camera, no audio, just presence. It flickered onto the call like a ghost in a cathedral. No one said a word. No one dared. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Could practically hear boardroom chairs across state lines scooting back from conference tables. Legal pads being filled in terrified cursive. Slack channels erupting in private group chats with panicked acronyms. Meredith didn't gloat. She just leaned back, took a measured breath, and said one final sentence, clear, calm, inevitable. "We're just getting started." Then she ended the call herself. No wave, no polite delay, no smile. The Zoom window closed. Back at HQ, nobody knew who to talk to first. IT started pulling logs. HR began drafting a response that legal immediately nixed. The general counsel, unreachable since his abrupt disconnect, had forwarded 3 voicemails to the external crisis firm by the time the call ended. In her apartment, Meredith placed her binder on the shelf, labeled it, archived it, and opened a new one. Because the investigation wasn't the end. It was only the audit trail's beginning. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.